Can you imagine life without music? I can't either. I just can't even conceive of it. And I really do love all kinds of music, all genres, especially jazz. And it's because of its improvisational nature. The very first talk I ever did before I was a minister, when I was in ministerial training, was a talk called The Music of the Cosmos is Jazz. And it was about how we are improvising on the top of what I call basic chord structure, but is that vibration of life, and that each one of us arises out of it, individualizing it, and we get to play our tune. We get to take our solo. We get to individualize it. It's a metaphor for me, but it's very real. That actually is what is happening. So to be really free, a musician, first of all, has to master his instrument. Right, guys? Got to play the thing, right? And a lot of people just, not a lot, a few people just play. They play by ear, they just have a natural, but most people have to learn it. And they have to learn theory and chord structure, and then they can improvise. So there's a certain level of discipline associated with attaining that kind of freedom. And that's what we want to talk about today. My brother Jim, many years ago, did some custom house painting for Doc Severinsen. You remember him? He's the trumpet player for the Johnny Carson show. So he saw him at home every day for a long time, and he said even though Doc had been playing the trumpet for decades, he practiced for several hours every single day. And he used to say to Jimmy, as musicians do, I don't want to lose my chops, right? And here's the point. You can lose your spiritual chops, too, if you're not practicing. It's easy to lose them if you get mired in negativity, or you get involved in somebody else's drama, or your own story that you've been telling over and over and over again, or you're just too busy to practice. So we're talking about spiritual freedom today. And what my definition for today is that it is not being terrorized by your own mind. It was called the tyranny of your own mind, with its fears and its ego-driven reactions and demands. So the discipline is a deep-level choice to listen to what our true self prompts us to do, rather than our false sense of self, which we call ego or the local self. So the other day I wrote this on Facebook, and this is applicable here. What did you learn in kindergarten? Stop, look, and I said, stop, look, and for God's sake, listen, right? For the sake of God and you, for the sake of the higher self, for the sake of being in touch with that which our heart, our soul, our true colors are asking us to do in the moment. And it will always be something that makes things better, that brings more love or more joy or more clarity or more connection into the world, and therefore more freedom. So it's like this, and I know you can all relate to this. Have you ever decided you're going to change a habit or start something you haven't been doing, like daily exercise? You said, okay, all right, I'm going to start exercising, and maybe you even buy one of those fancy machines, and you got it home, and you took hours to set it up, and there it is. And the problem is, you're motivated in the moment. You know what to do. You even know how to do it, but you can't get yourself to do it. Have you ever had that experience? Have you? Of course you have. Why is it that we can't get ourselves to do what we know how to do and what we know would be the best thing to do? We're in a war of two minds. We're in a war of two ideas. We're having a battle with ourselves. So this is called falling into the prison of the habituated mind, the very opposite of freedom. So there's a brief window in every one of those encounters, whether it's, to do exercise or eat more healthily or whatever it is, how you relate to somebody. There's always this window of opportunity, and there are many throughout the day, when we could feel more powerful than we have ever felt in our life if we followed the prompting of the self, if we listen deeply to what the heart wants to do. And that's what Joseph Campbell meant when he said, follow your bliss. He really wasn't talking about work. He was talking about follow your bliss always leads to freedom, freedom of self-expression, freedom to improvise, a freedom to be creative and to try new things. Follow your bliss means follow your heart, follow your soul, follow that beautiful self that we are. So in this country, you know, we're celebrating, actually tomorrow is Canada Day, it's their Independence Day, and of course this week is July 4th. Today is Gay Pride. There are big happenings all over the place. There's a lot of celebrations of freedom right now. And we're really fortunate to live in this country where we do have a lot of freedom. And yet at the same time, we have the choice of how to express because of our freedoms, but we often just keep repeating old ways of doing things. So I wanted you to imagine if you had to walk several miles a day to get clean water, or if your children were hungry and you couldn't feed them, or if you had no home, no shelter for your family. Then and only then would we have a right to say, I'm too busy. I'm too busy to meditate. I'm too busy to think about my choices. I'm in survival mode. Nobody here is. Nobody in America actually is. There are so many options and so many resources available to us. Sometimes people don't know about them, but that's another matter. So we might not know we're doing it, but we train our mind to think in a certain way. I've told this story over the years because it's such a good analogy to how we are with our mind. I may have told it here, but I don't remember. My daughter used to have 2 golden retrievers, Roscoe and Pebbles. And at that time, they lived in a little house in Carlsbad. It had a little picket fence. And her husband, who was really good with dogs, trained them not to leap over the fence because, you know, they're big, and they'd come bounding out the front yard, barking at whatever was going by, and then they would stop because that fence was there, and he had trained them not to leap over. So when he decided to build a garage and widen the driveway, he had to take that fence down. And those 2 dogs would still come bounding out, barking, and they would stop, dead stop where the fence used to be. They would not leave the yard. They were so well trained. That's what we're like. If we don't examine our thoughts, if we don't challenge our old beliefs, if we don't say, wait a minute, this feels way too familiar, this keeps happening, then, you know, we're like in the prison walls. We're within the walls of an emotional, mental prison. If we don't change, if we keep repeating the same behaviors, you know, there's a certain continuity that we like, and it's good, it's healthy. But if it's not leading us to freedom and bliss, why are we doing it, right? If that really is the goal of life. You know, we asked the Dalai Lama once, what's the purpose of life? He says, to be happy. And a lot of Westerners say, that can't be true. Life's supposed to be hard, right? You're supposed to work hard. And we have adopted that nonsense, and because we have missed the deeper meaning of religion and spirituality, but not here. All right, so we become reactive rather than responsive. And I wrote something this last week that I think really applies here. I'm just going to kind of reinterpret it a little bit. There's an old saying that Emerson talked about called, God comes to us without bell. This is a really deep idea. God comes to us without bell. It means there is no wall, there's no barrier, there's no separation of any kind between God and us. It doesn't have to get our attention. It is always present. It doesn't have to ring a bell. Hey, I'm here. It's always present with it. And I find that even in New Thought, and I totally get this, it's sometimes difficult for people to accept God within. It just seems hard to accept because we think of ourselves as this body and this personality and our past and, you know, our relationships and all the things that we do in life. So we put it out there and we find it easier to relate to. And if that's for you, that's fine. But I think the day must come when we bring it in and we realize we are speaking with the voice of God, individualizing it, personalizing it, making it our own. That's our purpose. So our purpose is to be happy and allow that power. And what is God if not love and intelligence? to allow love and intelligence to speak through us and to become our life and to become our relationships and our work and everything else that we do. Remember, I used this quote last week, and if you weren't here, and if you were, it's one of my favorite quotes, and it talks about that, God being present. It says, when it breathes through your intellect, it's genius. When it breathes through your will, it's virtue. And when it flows through your affections, it's love. In other words, it's always being shaped by us, by our sense of who we are and what we have a right to expect and what this life is all about. So the sense here is that we allow it to breathe through us by responding to it rather than outer stimulus or our little naysaying mind. This is the practice. Going back to stop, look, and for God's sakes, listen. Listen to that place within that is not attempting to get anything, but is prompting us to express something good and true and beautiful of our true colors, our true nature. So it requires us to be somewhat stable in the first place. Reactive people are not quiet on the inside. Have you ever noticed when you're just really reacting, like, oh, and whatever you do, you're all jumped up and you feel jumpy and nervous, and it's not a good feeling, right? Have you ever noticed how anger is not a good feeling? It's a horrible feeling, isn't it? Because you're off balance. Your energy is all scattered. Doesn't love feel different? Yeah, it's stable and smooth. Okay, so people who are jumpy jump to conclusions. Those are the ones that are constantly being jerked around by life, really, seriously. They're like, Maharishi used to compare people who don't meditate to a ship in choppy seas that has no rudder. And it's just flopping around. It might make a little headway, but it'll get pretty torn up in the process. But through daily practice, it begins to be driven from intelligence. And it's like a rudder or a helm or sails that allow us to actually move forward using the forces of nature, in this analogy, the wind, to take us forward. But there has to be some stability, some emotional, mental stability in our organism first. And we keep trying to get it from the outside world. We keep trying to buy things or have certain people in our lives or medicate ourselves or food or whatever we do. We're trying to get that stability feeling when the only way we can get it is within. Everything else is temporary. Everything else will go away, and we'll be left with the same ideas we had before. So it all begins with overcoming our own resistances. Like there's that exercise machine, and there's that moment of choice where we use our will. That's a right use of will, by the way. We make ourselves do it. So who is doing that? My analogy that I use in class all the time is that when a person who has been an abusive drinker, for instance, goes to their first recovery meeting, an AA meeting, it is not the drinker who takes them there. It's the true self that says, you're greater than this. And it has, the local mind has gotten to a point where it has had to listen, right? Because things are just not working. You get to a point where you realize my ideas aren't working. And so it's like anything else. The healthy whole self is the one that says, let's do this. And it's the fearful ego local self that says, oh, I don't want to. I don't want to. It's like that child, the child that dawdles and says, later, I'll do it later. Do you have any of that in you? Oh, come on, you do too. I do. I don't want to. I'll do it later. So there's that moment where we overcome our own resistances, and spiritual practice helps us to do that. That's what I'm saying. Spiritual practice, meditation, spiritual mind treatment, contemplation, quiet time, being in nature, give us more mental, emotional stability so we can actually make choices rather than react to everything that's going on. So a daily practice of silence and communing with our source goes a long way to keep this lifeboat that we are on an even keel. So our best practice is doing nothing on a regular basis, because it's an effective use of mind that allows us a glimpse of our true colors. And it starts to create an opening for them so that they can emerge through all those human experiences, through those ego-generated reactions. So summer's a really good metaphor, I think, for this, for relaxation, getting away from it all. We can get away from it all in our own home, just sitting down and shutting our eyes and listening to the higher self that just sort of says, come this way. You know, I've used this before, and I probably will for always, is the prodigal son story in Christian literature. The young man who went far, far away from home and spent his inheritance that he begged his father to give him. Runs out of money, is really in trouble, and has to go home. And as he turns to walk home, he sees his father coming towards him. That's it right there. That's the greatest story in the Bible as far as I'm concerned. And that's us. When we've had enough of reacting rather than responding, enough of limitation, enough of anger, enough of seeing the worst in people, enough of all the stuff we do, we think we're protecting ourselves, and we turn away, something comes to greet us. And that's why people feel so good when they meditate all the time, because it's a sense of having met something. And it's just us. It's our real self that's behind all these wild and crazy ideas that we have. So Ernest Holmes, the founder of this teaching in modern times, said, the imagination is creative, but the will is directive. So the right use of will is to take charge of our self-talk and move it into positive affirmation. Don't you, like me, talk to yourself all day long? Isn't it amazing what goes on in here? These long conversations. You ever have conversations with people who are maybe dead or long out of your life, and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm still having that talk. I'm still having that conversation, or I'm still trying to make that conversation different than it was. That's taking charge of it, is when we notice what we're doing. It's not wrong. It's just the way the mind works in a local sense. It's repetitive. But the non-local part of our mind, that aspect that's spiritual, is not repetitive. It's always brand new. Always right now, brand new. So the right use of will is to take charge of that. And you know, our mind actually is naturally attuned to silence. You know, it actually prefers it. And that's why we feel so good with just a little bit of it. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. So in the balance of the two, the inner and the outer, we get healthier, happier, and more attractive. And who wouldn't like that? I have a poem I want to share with you today. It's maybe a little music, soft music behind it. Mary Oliver is one of my favorite poets. She wrote this one called The Journey. You might want to close your eyes. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left those voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save, your life. So let's remember that the one life that is being all life is God. Not a man in the sky, but you, in form, here to improvise all the qualities of God: love, joy, peace, vitality, supply, radiance, creativity. We are here to demonstrate the presence. And so today we make a new agreement with ourselves that we will, from this moment on, look within for the answers. Look within and talk to ourselves. Look within and listen to the higher idea that is sure to greet us as we open to it. There is a power in us that knows what to do in every instance, knows that it knows. And it is always following the bliss of freedom. And the only discipline required of us is that we do nothing but be in that presence. And so today, let's affirm in our own way that from this moment on, we do take charge of our powerful, creative mind. We let our imagination soar and our will direct. And in that field of imagination, there are no limits. It is a boundless, infinite field of potential. And we let ourselves imagine way beyond anything we've ever known or done before. We imagine life flowing through us magnificently, effortlessly, in love and joy and peace and fun and creativity, and imagine that we are constantly supplied with whatever is necessary to fulfill the idea in the moment. That there is no lag time, there is no process, there's just now. And now we are the visible evidence of an incredible intelligence and an absolute love, creating this universe out of itself. And so we leave here today making a decision to be who we really are and to reveal our true colors and to do what we've got to do effortlessly, eagerly, and enjoy. And with that in mind, we let it be, and so it is.